Chapter 4 of Almond-Blossom. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Almond-Blossom by Wadsley. Chapter 4. I thought to find lips wither, listening cease, and eyes grow blind. Yet still my eyes, where hope no longer grows, beyond all other eyes keep watch for those. Mine ear awaits thy voice without my door, and my hand seeks for thy hand evermore. Monica Peveril Turnbull. Francesca's son was born in a midsummer, which seemed to swoon in a haze of amethyst-tinted heat. The day had no vitality, the very air seemed exhausted, and as a breathless evening closed in, with the waning of the day's weary loveliness, Francesca's strength waned too. She died at dawn, a little faint inscrutable smile on her curved lips, her last look one of love for Tony, and it seemed to him, meeting it, welcoming it, that Francesca must be getting better. It was so like her usual smile, a little mocking in some way, a little wistful, wholly sweet. He knelt down by the side of the big bed, from which all the tinted hangings had been stripped away, and took Francesca's frail hand in his. 1,000 incoherent memories flooded his tired mind, jostling one another impotently, inducing in him a sense of intolerable, irritating fatigue. God, if the day would come! Fay, speak! They had a son. What a lifetime ago it seemed since Fay had told him. They had beaten the home coverts that day, or hunted, and one night in Spain she had talked to him a little the same, before they had taken Doro, their wedding day, and the yellow roses a waiter had got somewhere. Odd how that sort of fellow managed to get things. There had never been a woman to touch Fay. Why on all God's earth didn't some doctor or other give her something to buck her up, bring her round? She'd such vitality. That day, years ago, out hunting after her accident. Her hand moved very gently in his. He lifted his haggard face. Fay was looking very clearly at him. "You're better?" he said hoarsely. She smiled straight into his blue eyes, tenderly, understandingly. Her lips moved. "Fay!" Tony called loudly, in uncontrollable anguish. She had always answered his every need, divining from the very first that only such love could serve him. She made a great effort now, her sweetest and last. In the nursery Rex cried, and Doro considered him, then expressed her consideration in Spanish at Emilia's knee. "But he is of a littleness," she remarked gravely, "and of a queerness." Upon further reflection, his toes alone seemed satisfactory. Doro could recognize a human resemblance there. In point of fact, Rex was like his mother. He had dark eyes and an absurd fluff of daffodil hair. He was, rather naturally, an extremely nervous baby, and he cried incessantly, a poor anxious little cry which wrung Emilia's soft heart entirely. "Cry, cry, cry," said Doro. "What a baby!" Tony saw his son for the first time a month after his birth. He came in from an inspection of the farms, gaitered and booted. He walked heavily, without any spring, and his face looked lethargic, his eyes dull. He only came to the nursery now because there was some question of structural alteration, and it was essential he should give the matter his personal attention. He stood just within the door, unnoticed by Emilia or Doro. Francesca had adored redecorating the nursery. He remembered distinctly choosing the Hans Andersen tiles for the fireplace at Good's. They had lunched at the Berkeley that day, a dozen unimportant details, immortalized now by their dearness and very ordinariness, appealing as perhaps only things just so little and usual can appeal, when the opportunity of their recurrence is gone for ever, thronged his memory. Fay had been wearing gardenias that day. They had had a waiter whom they had known at the Carlton. The hold-up in Piccadilly outside Devonshire House had been a record one. Later they had walked to Good's, which Fay said absurdly was the best mannered shop in town because it opened its doors to you at your approach all of its own accord. What tiny ridiculous things people who were happy laughed at! Opposite, on the glazed and gleaming tiles, the little tin soldier saluted eternally. "We must have this set. Look at him, and think of explaining him to Rex," Fay had said. Tony tramped into the room, and Doro rushed at him, arms upheld, emerald-shod feet going perilously fast. "Up, up!" she commanded. He lifted her in his arms, and at once she cuddled an adorable cheek to his. Such a cool soft touch against his face, and an indefinable yet vaguely consoling sense of femininity seemed to float to him from a long way off, and he felt for a second less hideously miserable. "Hello, old lady," he said to Doro, walking across towards Emilia, who had risen and stood looking at him now with a mingling of hurt pride and sorrow. Tony gazed down at his son, his own face set, his mouth a bar of obstinacy. This for her. Rex lifted dark lashes and met his father's gaze gravely. He had Fay's eyes exactly, dark amber, translucent. Retriever eyes, Tony had called them once, rather pleased with his parallel, and he had added, "Retrieve me anyway, anyhow, from anywhere, darling." He went on meeting his little son's darkly golden look. "Excellency will hold him?" Emilia suggested softly. She had transferred Rex to his father's free arm before he could reply. Tony went on looking down, remembering painfully. He felt none of that deep stirring he had been told fathers invariably experience. Only his grief stirred anew, and it never rested long. He gave Rex back to Emilia, kissed Doro, and went out. It was a perfect day, a day of soft flooding light, of sweet freshness. Autumn was coming, but like a lover to deck his love in loveliness. The second roses bloomed in glory. The sun drew out the poignant scent from the cut-box hedges. Tony went to sit in the wall rose garden. He lit his pipe, and took off his cap, and looked round him. He knew it was a lovely day, but the days, all of them now, seemed so damn endless, all the same. His mind worked dully, going over and over the same problem. His life felt maimed. The influence of Fay's death was like a trap from which he could not escape. He seemed to hustle round clumsily in it, clumsily and slowly, bruising himself all the while. He had a feeling he had been duped, treated with inscrutable unfairness. Since the fusion of one's identity in that of another was a decree of life itself to ensure its completion, surely it was monstrous that, suddenly, for no sane reason, that fusion should be broken, dispersed for ever, one life left mangled, suffering horribly. The fact that this thing could be made every great fact grotesque and cruel. Extraordinary, too, to think that before his marriage he had been content. Now he was alone, a single life again. But God, what a difference! His mind fumbled with its grief, which seemed to cut him off from all humanity. Other people told him of their sympathy, and he accepted their speech with mechanical courtesy. But in his own mind he was thinking, "What do you care? You'll go back to your home. You've all your real interests waiting for you the minute you cut clear of this forced sympathy meeting. It's only a bore, really, having to be sorry. I used to feel like that myself about other people, so I know." And again it gave him an almost jealous misery to listen to other people discussing Fay. The place irritated him, too. Each room was a reminder. Fay had been one of those women, rarer than one realizes, whose imprint lives in their home. Many women of personality lack this gift, often because decided personality induces a certain complacent little hardness, and, strange as it may seem, you must possess a definite gentleness to be able to influence your furniture. Fay had concentrated on her marriage, and submerged herself in it to a great extent, and her home had therefore mattered to her rather greatly. It had been a beautiful place before she had come to it, but she had made beauty comfort too. Collections of her various small delights stamped her impression in many rooms. Fay had adored boxes and fans. She had collected tiny models of shoes from every place where her own feet had rested in her travels with Tony. The boxes, lovely, delicate, miniature things of shell and animal and jewels, lay about, some filled with cigarettes. The fans were framed and unframed. You trod the highways and cobbled parts of Europe in tiny shoes, fashioned in Bucharest, Madrid, Maggiore, or Biarritz. Tony had sometimes bought a box, and had never failed to receive delighted thanks for his thought and choice and general dearness. But since he knew nothing of boxes whatever, save as square, oblong, or round effects which opened and shut, and since Fay's love for him had not rendered his discrimination sapient, the worst examples vanished discreetly. He sat on in the rose garden. The shadows from the avenue began to stretch out across the park. A clock chimed from the stable yard, intensifying by its solitary notes the soft mournfulness of the drooping sunset. A feeling of utter desolation, of depression so deep it was like a smothering pall, held Tony. He had a ghastly sense. "I can't get out. I can't escape. I've got to go through with it," which seems to rob the soul of power to hope, of any vision beyond the appalling dreariness of the moment. Life would go on, that was all, and people talked of that as a mercy. Nick came out, not running but walking. He stood in a last patch of sunlight, and lifted his head, then steered towards Tony. He walked up to him and sat beside him, looking away. Tony stared down at him. There was something friendly somehow in the way his stiff white coat stuck out a little above his collar. Tony called his name. Nick's glance met his in less than a second, it seemed. Tony's hand slid down into the friendly bit of Nick's back, into the tufty little spike of hair, and instantly Nick pressed close against his gaitered leg. They sat together whilst the night floated from the sky, veil within veil of enshrouding deep blueness. Tony was conscious of Nick's warmth, Nick instinct with that strange sympathy which only a dog who loves you can feel. He had a touch of rheumatism himself in a hind leg, and the grass was growing damp, but he never stirred. At last Tony got up, and Nick raised himself very gingerly. They began the walk back to the house. Tony said, "I've settled it then. I shall get off as soon as I can. I can't stay here, and there's nothing to keep me. The children will be taken good care of. To sit through the days like this, to lie awake night after night, I cannot do it. It's settled. I clear." End of chapter 4 of Almond-Blossom. Recording by Mary Selquy.